My name is Julie, and this is the story of how my life was turned upside down, not once, but twice. I guess I should start from the beginning. I was born to loving parents, Larry and Joanna David, in a small suburban town. My dad was a journalist, and my mom worked as a nurse. We weren't rich, but we were happy. Life was pretty normal until I turned 14, and then everything changed. It was a rainy Friday evening when my parents were driving home from a dinner party. I was at home with my grandma, watching some silly cartoon when the phone rang. I'll never forget the chill that went through me when I heard my grandma crying softly in the kitchen. The next few days were a blur. They told us Mom had died instantly in the crash. Dad survived, but just barely. When I finally saw him in the hospital, he was just a shadow of the man I once knew. His legs were crushed, and the doctor said he'd never walk again. "Julie," he whispered, reaching for my hand. "I'm so sorry, sweetie. I'm so sorry." I didn't understand why he was apologizing. It wasn't his fault a drunk driver had crashed into their car. But as I got older, I realized he was sorry for what our lives had become, for the struggles we would face, for the mother I had lost, and for the father he thought he could no longer be. But my dad, Larry David, was stronger than he gave himself credit for. After he got out of the hospital and adjusted to life in a wheelchair, he threw himself into his work. He had always been a talented writer, and now he focused all his energy on his job as an editor at the city's major newspaper. As I entered my teenage years, Dad made sure I had everything I needed. He encouraged me to join clubs, make friends, and have as normal a life as possible. But the truth was, I preferred spending time with him. We watched old movies together, argued about books, and he helped me with my homework. When it was time for college, Dad insisted that I go away to school. "You need to spread your wings, kiddo," he said. "Don't worry about me, I'll be fine." I was hesitant, but I knew he was right, so I went off to college. I went to the State University of New York and studied accounting. That's where I met Emma, who became my best friend. Through Emma, I met her second cousin, Paul. Paul was kind and funny, and he didn't flinch when I told him about my dad. In fact, the first time he met Dad, they got along right away, bonding over their shared love of classic rock. Later, Paul told me, "Your dad is cool, and you're amazing for taking care of him all these years." I tried to play it off, but inside I was glowing. For the first time since the accident, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could have a normal life, a life with love, laughter, and even a family of my own someday. After graduation, things started to fall into place like a puzzle. I got a job at the local tax service, and Paul started working as a long-haul truck driver. We dated for 4 years before he proposed to me on a crisp autumn evening in the park where we had our first date. I was thrilled, but there was one thing I needed to make clear. "Yes, Paul, but I can't leave my dad. He needs me." Paul smiled wide and said, "I wouldn't have it any other way. We'll all live together. Your dad's apartment is big enough for the 3 of us, right?" The wedding was small but beautiful. Dad insisted on wheeling himself down the aisle to give me away. There wasn't a dry eye in the place. As I stood there, holding Paul's hand, I felt like I was living a fairy tale. But every fairy tale has its villains, and mine came in the form of my mother-in-law, Maria, and my sister-in-law, Olivia. From the moment I met them, I could tell they didn't approve of me. "So your father is handicapped?" Maria asked during our first meeting, wrinkling her nose like she smelled something bad. "He's disabled," I corrected, trying to stay calm. "But he works as an editor." "How nice," she interrupted, clearly not interested. Then she turned to Paul and asked, "Are you sure about this? There are so many nice girls from good families." I felt my face flush with anger and embarrassment, but Paul immediately defended me. "Mom, Julie is from a good family. Her dad's disability doesn't change that. I love her, and that's all that matters." That shut Maria up, but I could still see the disapproval in her eyes. Olivia, following her mother's lead, was just as cold towards me after the wedding. True to his word, Paul moved in with Dad and me, and our life settled into a comfortable routine. I'd go to work at the tax office, while Paul was on the road for days at a time. When he was home, we'd all have dinner together. But whenever Maria and Olivia visited, the atmosphere in our home changed. They acted like they owned the place, barely acknowledging Dad's presence. Once, I overheard Maria whispering to Olivia, "It's a shame. Paul could have done so much better. Now he's stuck with this girl and her crippled father. What if they have children? Can you imagine the genes?" I was furious, but I kept quiet for Paul's sake. I tried to keep the peace, but it was getting harder and harder. One evening, after a particularly tense visit from Maria and Olivia, I broke down in tears. Paul found me in our bedroom, crying. "Hey, hey," he said, pulling me into his arms. "What's wrong?" "Your mom and sister," I sobbed. "They hate me. They think I'm not good enough for you because of Dad." Paul's face hardened. "That's ridiculous. You and your dad are my family now. If they can't accept that, it's their problem, not ours." His words comforted me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of our troubles with Maria and Olivia. As the months went by, Paul's trucking business began to grow. He was always on the road, traveling across the country in his big rig. I missed him terribly when he was gone, but I focused on my work at the tax office and spent my evenings keeping Dad company. One crisp autumn evening, as I was helping Dad into bed, Paul called. His voice crackled with excitement over the phone. "Julie, I've been thinking," he said. "How would you feel about buying a townhouse? It would be easier for your dad to move around in a wheelchair. He could spend more time outside. Plus, you could have a garden, something to keep you busy when I'm on the road." The more he talked, the more I liked the idea. I glanced at Dad, who was pretending not to eavesdrop. "What do you think, Dad?" I asked, putting the phone on speaker. Dad's eyes lit up. "A garden would be nice," he admitted, "and it would be easier to get outside." That settled it. Over the next few weeks, we threw ourselves into house hunting. We finally found the perfect place, a spacious townhouse with wide doorways, a roll-in shower for Dad, and a beautiful backyard. Taking out a mortgage was scary, but with Paul's income, mine, and the rent from Dad's old apartment, we managed to make it work. We moved in on a sunny Sunday in spring, and I'll never forget the look on Dad's face as he wheeled himself out onto our new patio. "This is perfect, sweetie," he said, his eyes misty. "Thank you." We spent the next few months settling in and making the place our own. I planted a small vegetable garden, and Dad would sit outside for hours, enjoying the sunshine and fresh air. It was peaceful, almost perfect. Then we decided to have a housewarming party. We invited friends, colleagues, and yes, even Maria and Olivia. The party was in full swing when they showed up, fashionably late as usual. They walked in, looking around with barely hidden envy. As we walked through the house, I could see Maria thinking about something. When we reached the master bedroom, she turned to me with a sly smile. "You know, Julie," she said quietly, "this would be perfect for Paul and me. Why don't you send your father to a nursing home? Then I could move in here." I felt like I'd been slapped. "Excuse me," I managed to say. "Oh, don't look so shocked," Maria continued. "Your father isn't well. He's not a whole person anymore, is he? He doesn't need all this luxury. A nursing home would be more than enough for someone in his condition." Before I could respond, Maria marched out to the patio where Dad was talking with some guests. To my horror, she grabbed the handles of his wheelchair and started pushing him toward the driveway. "Maria!" I shouted, running after her. "What are you doing?" "If he won't go to a nursing home, he can stay outside," she sneered. "That's what you wanted, isn't it? For him to be outdoors?" I was shaking with rage and disbelief. Thankfully, Paul heard the commotion and came running. His face turned red with anger when he saw what his mother was doing. "Mom," he yelled, "what the hell are you doing? Let go of Larry's chair right now." Maria looked shocked by Paul's tone. "But honey, I was just..." I don't want to hear it, Paul cut her off. You and Olivia need to leave now. After they left, Paul apologized over and over to Dad and me. I'm so sorry, he said, his voice breaking. I had no idea she would do that. I'm just so sorry. Dad reached out and patted Paul's hand. It's not your fault, son, he said gently. Some people just can't understand. Life settled into a new routine after that incident. Maria and Olivia kept their distance, which was fine with me. Paul focused on his work, taking on more long-haul routes to help pay for our new home. I split my time between my job at the tax office, taking care of our home, and looking after Dad. 4 years passed quickly. Our life became comfortable and predictable. Paul was on the road most of the time, but when he was home, our little family was happy. Dad's health was stable, and he seemed content, spending his days in the garden or working on his editing from home. Then came the call that shattered my world. I was at work when my phone rang. A man's unfamiliar voice greeted me, "Mrs. Walker, this is Officer Andrew from the Highway Patrol." My heart sank. "Yes," I barely managed to say. "I'm sorry to inform you that your husband, Paul Walker, has been in a serious accident." The rest of the conversation was a blur. Words like head-on collision and "didn't make it" floated around me, but I couldn't understand them. It wasn't until I heard myself thanking the officer and hanging up that the reality began to hit me. Paul was gone. The next week was a fog of grief and disbelief. I went through the motions of planning the funeral like a robot, barely understanding what was happening. The day before the funeral, I gathered my courage and called Maria. I thought she deserved to hear about her son's death from me, not from a newspaper obituary. "Hello," Maria's sharp voice answered. "Maria, it's Julie," I said, my voice trembling. "It's about Paul. He's gone. There was an accident." There was silence on the other end of the line, and then, to my shock, Maria's voice came back, dripping with anger. "This is your fault," she hissed. "You made him work so hard, driving that truck to pay for your fancy house. You killed my son." I was stunned. "Maria, that's not—" "Save it," she snapped. "I expect you to give him the best funeral money can buy, but don't expect a penny from us. You made your bed, now lie in it." The line went dead. I stood there, phone in hand, tears streaming down my face. How could she be so cruel? How could she blame me for this? The day of Paul's funeral was gray and rainy, matching my mood perfectly. The church was full. Paul was well-liked in the community, and it seemed like half the town had come to pay their respects. After the service, as people passed by to offer their condolences, I noticed that Paul's mother and sister were nowhere to be seen. They hadn't even bothered to show up for their own son and brother's funeral. Dad reached out and squeezed my hand. "It's their loss, sweetie. We're family, and we'll get through this together." As we pulled into our driveway, something seemed off. The lights were on in the house, which was strange because I was sure I had turned everything off before we left. "Did you leave any lights on, Dad?" I asked, frowning. He shook his head. "No, I don't think so." As we got closer, I noticed movement inside the house. My heart started pounding. Were we being robbed on the day of Paul's funeral? I quickly helped Dad out of the car and into his wheelchair, my mind racing. Should I call the police? But as we approached the front door, I heard familiar voices inside. A chill ran down my spine as I recognized them. I pushed open the door to find Maria and Olivia in our living room, surrounded by boxes and pieces of furniture. "What the hell is going on here?" I demanded, my grief momentarily forgotten in the face of this outrageous intrusion. Maria turned to me, her face a mask of fake sympathy. "Oh, Julie dear, we're just helping you pack up. After all, you can't possibly afford to keep this place now that Paul is gone." I was speechless. Olivia added, her voice sickeningly sweet, "Don't worry, you can go back to your father's apartment. It's cozy." I could feel the anger building inside me. "Get out," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Get out of my house right now." Maria had the nerve to look offended. This house belongs to us now. All of Paul's property does. We're his family after all. Like hell you are, I exploded. Where were you today? At his funeral? Oh, that's right, you couldn't be bothered to show up. Maria waved her hand dismissively. We were busy making arrangements. Now be a good girl and start packing. We'll meet you out by tomorrow. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. These women hadn't shed a tear for Paul, hadn't even attended his funeral, and now they were trying to kick us out of our home. I'm calling the police, I said, pulling out my phone. Maria and Olivia exchanged worried looks. They clearly hadn't expected me to fight back. Now, Julie, Maria began, but I cut her off. No, you have exactly 10 minutes to get out of my house before I call the cops. This is my home. Paul and I bought it together. You have no right to be here. Maybe it was the steel in my voice or the fire in my eyes, but Maria and Olivia finally realized they had gone too far. They gathered their things and left, but not before Maria turned to me with a sneer. This isn't over, Julie. You'll be hearing from our lawyers. The days after Paul's funeral were a blur of grief, anxiety, and paperwork. I threw myself into sorting out Paul's affairs, partly to keep busy and partly out of fear that Maria and Olivia would try to take what wasn't theirs. A week after the funeral, I received a call from a local law firm. My heart pounded as I answered the call, afraid it was Maria following through on her threat of legal action. Mrs. Walker, a crisp, professional voice asked, "This is Scott Thompson from Thompson and Partners. I'm calling about your late husband's will." I felt a small flicker of hope. His will? I didn't know he had one. Yes, ma'am. Mr. Walker came to see us about 5 months ago. He asked that we contact you in the event of his passing. I scheduled an appointment for the next day, my mind spinning. Why hadn't Paul told me about this? What did it mean? The next morning, I wheeled Dad into Mr. Thompson's office. The lawyer greeted us warmly, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "Mrs. Walker, Mr. David, thank you for coming in," he said, gesturing for us to sit near his desk. "I'm sorry for your loss." Mr. Thompson opened a file on his desk. "Now, as I mentioned on the phone, your husband came to see us to draft his will. He was very clear about his wishes." I held my breath as Mr. Thompson began to read. "I, Paul Walker, being of sound mind, do hereby leave all my worldly possessions to my beloved wife, Julie Walker." I gasped, and Dad's grip on my hand tightened. Mr. Thompson continued, "This includes our home, my truck, and all our savings. It is my wish that Julie use these resources to care for herself and her father, Larry David, whom I have come to love as my own." Tears streamed down my face. Even from beyond the grave, Paul was taking care of us. "There's more," Mr. Thompson said gently. "Mr. Walker left a letter for you." He handed me an envelope. With shaking hands, I opened it and began to read. "My dearest Julie, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I'm so sorry for leaving you and Larry. Please know that you two are the best thing that ever happened to me. I made this will because I know how my mother and sister can be. I didn't want to worry you, but I needed to make sure you and Larry were protected if anything happened to me. You're my real family, Julie, you and Larry, not them. Take care of each other, live your lives to the fullest, and know that I'll always be watching over you. All my love, Paul." I clutched the letter to my chest, sobbing. Dad was crying too, his weathered hand patting my arm. Mr. Thompson gave us a moment before speaking again. "Mrs. Walker, there's one more thing. Your husband's truck was insured. Given the circumstances of the accident, the insurance company will be paying out the full value of the policy." I looked up, sniffling, and asked, "What does that mean?" Mr. Thompson gave me a small smile and said, "It means you'll be receiving a large sum of money, enough to pay off your mortgage and more." As we left the lawyer's office, I felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. We were going to be okay. Paul had made sure of it. As we pulled into our driveway, I noticed a familiar car parked on the street. My heart sank as I recognized Maria's sleek sedan. "Oh no," I muttered, "what now?" Sure enough, Maria and Olivia were waiting on our front porch. But this time, I wasn't afraid. I had Paul's letter in my pocket and the strength of his love in my heart. "Julie," Maria began as we approached, her voice sickly sweet, "we need to talk about Paul's estate." I stood tall, looking her straight in the eye. "No, Maria, we don't. Paul left everything to me. It's all legal and official. And do you want to know why? Because we were his real family, not you. Now please leave your trespassing on my property." For once, Maria was speechless. Olivia tugged at her arm, whispering urgently. With one last venomous glare, they got in their car and drove away. The weeks after our meeting with the lawyer were busy. I threw myself into settling Paul's affairs, grateful for the distraction from my grief. The insurance payout came through, and just as Mr. Thompson had said, it was enough to pay off our mortgage with plenty left over. One afternoon, as I was going through Paul's desk, I found a small notebook. Curious, I opened it and saw pages filled with his messy handwriting. It was a journal of sorts, full of his thoughts and plans for our future. Thinking about starting a college fund for our future kids, one entry read, "Want to make sure they have the best start in life." My heart clenched. We had talked about having children someday, but had decided to wait until we were more financially stable. Now, reading Paul's private hopes and dreams, I felt a fresh wave of grief wash over me. "Oh, Paul," I whispered, holding the notebook close, "we had so many plans." That night, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. My mind kept drifting to the journal, to the future we'd never have. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of Paul. He was smiling, holding out his hand to me. "It's okay, Julie," he said in my dream. "Everything's going to be all right." I woke up the next morning feeling different. I couldn't quite figure out what it was, but something had changed. As I got ready for work, a wave of nausea hit me, and I barely made it to the bathroom in time. The morning sickness didn't go away in the days that followed. At first, I thought it was just stress and grief, but a small voice in the back of my mind suggested something else. After a week of this, I found myself in the pharmacy, staring at pregnancy tests. With trembling hands, I bought one and hurried home. The 5 minutes I waited for the result felt like the longest of my life. When I finally looked at the test, there were 2 clear blue lines. I sank to the bathroom floor, overwhelmed by a mix of emotions: joy, fear, grief, and hope all swirling together. "Julie," Dad's voice came through the door. "Everything okay in there?" I opened the door, tears streaming down my face. Dad's expression changed from concern to alarm. "What's wrong, sweetie?" he asked. I held up the test, my hand shaking. "I'm pregnant, Dad." I fell into his arms, sobbing. He held me, stroking my hair like he used to when I was a little girl. "It's okay," he murmured. "It's going to be okay. You're not alone, Julie. And this baby is a gift, a piece of Paul that will live on." His words hit me deeply. This baby was a part of Paul, a continuation of our love. Suddenly, the fear began to fade, replaced by a strong determination. "You're right," I said, wiping my eyes. "This baby is a gift, and we're going to be okay." Dad smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "That's my girl. Now let's get you something to eat. You're eating for 2 now, after all." As we headed to the kitchen, I felt a sense of hope growing inside me. The road ahead would be challenging, but with my father by my side and Paul's child growing inside me, I knew we could face anything. As my belly grew with our child, I found strength I never knew I had. Dad was my rock, always there with a kind word or a helping hand. We settled into a new routine, just the 2 of us, eagerly awaiting the arrival of the newest member of our little family. One sunny afternoon, as I was tending to the garden Dad and I had planted together, I heard a car pull up. My heart sank as I recognized Maria's sedan. What could they possibly want now? I walked to the front of the house, one hand instinctively resting on my swollen belly. Maria and Olivia stood on our porch, looking both comfortable and slightly desperate. "Julie," Maria began, her voice missing its usual sharpness, "we need to talk to you." I raised an eyebrow, but said nothing, waiting for her to continue. Olivia spoke up, her eyes darting around nervously. "We've hit some hard times. We were wondering if we could stay in your father's old apartment just until we get back on our feet." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything they had put us through, they had the nerve to ask for more. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice firm but calm. "That's not possible. I don't want to communicate with you anymore." Maria's eyes narrowed as they noticed my pregnant belly. Her face twisted with shock and disgust. "You're pregnant?" she spat. "Already? You little prostitute. I can't believe you've already found a new man. Paul's body isn't even cold in the ground." I felt a surge of anger, but I pushed it down. I didn't bother explaining that it was Paul's child. I didn't want my baby to have such a grandmother and aunt. Instead, I smiled a small, secretive smile that seemed to unsettle Maria even more. "My personal life is none of your concern," I said calmly. "Now I think it's time for you to leave." Maria looked like she wanted to say more, but something in my expression must have stopped her. She turned on her heel, grabbing Olivia's arm. I watched as they drove away, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. I had stood my ground, protected my family, and kept my dignity. Paul would have been proud.